In the chilling autumn of 1939, as the phony war cast a deceptive stillness over Europe, 28-year-old physicist Dr. Reginald Victor Jones sat in a cramped, shadow-filled office at the British Air Ministry, staring at a ghost. He was looking at a fragment of a decoded German transmission that mentioned a cryptic word, Knickebein, crooked leg. To the seasoned intelligence officers and battle-hardened air marshals, it was merely another nonsensical code name for a mundane military unit. But to Jones, a man who viewed the world through the unforgiving laws of physics, the word felt like a deliberate clue to a technological nightmare. British military doctrine at the time dictated that precision night bombing was a physical impossibility. The curvature of the Earth was thought to act as a natural shield, preventing radio waves from traveling far enough to guide a bomber to its target. The establishment laughed at the young scientist, dismissing his fears as science fiction and mathematical paranoia. However, while the generals slept soundly, believing London was protected by the horizon itself, the Luftwaffe was already painting the English sky with invisible, lethal lines of energy. The skepticism of the Air Ministry turned into a cold, creeping dread when a crashed German Heinkel H-111 was recovered from the mud of a British field. Jones, acting on a frantic hunch, personally inspected the wreckage, ignoring the skeptics who claimed the radio equipment was standard. He discovered a receiver far too sensitive for mere communication, a device that seemed to be tuned to pick up a signal that officially didn't exist. Late into the night, spreading technical diagrams across his desk, Jones realized the terrifying truth. The Germans hadn't broken the laws of physics, they had mastered them. By using massive high-power transmitters on the European coast, Hitler's engineers had created a system of intersecting radio beams that acted like invisible railroad tracks in the sky. A bomber could fly in total darkness, following a steady tone in the pilot's headset until it crossed a second beam at a precise coordinate, the drop point. The unexpected turn came when Jones decoded a new set of coordinates that didn't point to a military base or a dockyard. The crooked leg wasn't just aimed at industry, it was pointed directly at the heart of London's civilian centers. But the most shocking realization was yet to come. As Jones traced the signal's origin, he found that the beams were already active. At that very moment, a fleet of bombers was likely already walking down the invisible tracks toward a Britain that still didn't believe the tracks existed. On June 21, 1940, Reginald Victor Jones stood before the heavy oak doors of the Cabinet Room at 10 Downing Street, his heart hammering against his ribs. At just 28 years old, he had been summoned to brief the most powerful men in the British Empire, including Prime Minister Winston Churchill himself. As he stepped into the room, he was met with a wall of thick cigar smoke and the impatient stares of decorated generals and senior ministers who had been debating for hours. The atmosphere was stiflingly skeptical. Many in the high command viewed Jones's theory of invisible radio beams as the paranoid delusions of a young academic. Air Marshal Sir Trafford Leigh-Mallory and other senior officers had already dismissed the idea, arguing that British pilots managed perfectly well without such gadgets and that the Germans were likely using conventional navigation. Jones felt the crushing weight of the moment. He knew that if he failed to convince them now, the Luftwaffe would continue to strike British cities with surgical precision while the RAF remained blind to the threat. Churchill, sensing the tension, turned his piercing gaze toward the young physicist and asked a single, blunt question about the possibility of these beams. Jones didn't hesitate. He asked for permission to tell the story from the beginning, knowing he had perhaps 15 minutes to prevent a national catastrophe. For the next 20 minutes, Jones spoke with a clinical, unwavering clarity that silenced the room. He bypassed the complex jargon of wave theory and instead used simple, vivid analogies, describing the Knickebein system as invisible railroad tracks that guided bombers directly to their targets. He laid out the evidence he had painstakingly gathered. The sensitive receivers found in the mud-caked wreckage of Heinkel bombers, the intercepted Enigma traffic mentioning bearing 315 toward Cleve, and the chilling interrogation of a German Luftwaffe pilot who had inadvertently let slip that he could find any city in England without ever looking out his cockpit window. As Jones spoke, Churchill's skepticism began to evaporate, replaced by a grim fascination. The Prime Minister, a man who loved technical innovation as much as he loved a good fight, realized that the blackest moment of the war was not just the fall of France, but the realization that the very air above Britain had been turned into a weapon. The unexpected twist came when one of the most vocal skeptics in the room suddenly realized that a German beam was, at that very second, likely passing directly over the building they were sitting in. Churchill didn't wait for a committee vote. He slammed his fist on the table and gave Jones total authority to hunt the beams, famously remarking that the Wizard War had begun. By the time Jones left the room, he was no longer just a junior physicist. He was the man responsible for the invisible shield of the United Kingdom.
Armed with Churchill's personal mandate, R.V. Jones moved with a speed that stunned the military bureaucracy. He immediately assembled a specialized unit of the Royal Air Force, dubbed the Blind Approach Training Development Unit, though their true mission was anything but training. Jones needed physical proof, the actual sound of the beams, to silence the remaining skeptics in the Air Ministry who still whispered that he was chasing phantoms. On the moonless night of June 21, 1940, an Avro Anson aircraft, modified with sensitive American-made Hallicrafters receivers, lifted off into the dark English skies. The pilot, Flight Lieutenant Wood, flew a grueling search pattern over the Midlands, his ears straining against the static of the headset. For hours there was nothing but the rhythmic hum of the engines and the empty crackle of the ether. The mission felt like a desperate gamble. If they returned empty-handed, Jones's Wizard War would be strangled in its infancy, and Britain's cities would remain defenseless targets for the Luftwaffe's invisible tracks. The breakthrough came at 23,000 feet near the city of Derby. Through the heavy atmospheric interference, a faint, rhythmic pulsing began to emerge, a steady stream of Morse code dots. As Wood banked the aircraft to the south, the dots sharpened, then blurred into a continuous, haunting, equi-signal tone, the sound of the invisible rail. They had found it. The Nicobine beam was real, and it was slicing through the heart of England with terrifying precision. Jones, waiting anxiously on the ground, received the coded confirmation and immediately triggered the next phase of his plan. Instead of using massive, obvious jamming stations, he utilized a fleet of low-powered medical diathermy machines, the kind used in hospitals to heat body tissue. By retuning these devices to the German frequency, he injected a subtle noise into the beam. The unexpected twist came during the very next raid. The German pilots, hearing what they thought was their own guidance signal, followed the bent beam with absolute confidence. They dropped their entire bomb load into the empty marshes and open fields of the countryside, miles away from the intended factories. In the German debriefing rooms, the Luftwaffe commanders were baffled. Their perfect system had functioned flawlessly, yet their bombs had vanished into the darkness, leaving the British industry untouched and the secret of the Wizard War still hidden in the static.
By November 1940, the Invisible War had escalated into a lethal game of chess. The Germans, realizing Nicobine was being tampered with, unleashed their most sophisticated weapon yet, X-Garret. Unlike the previous system, this one utilized multiple intersecting beams and a specialized automated clock that released bombs with surgical precision, independent of the pilot's judgment. Dr. R.V. Jones sat in his office, paralyzed by a fresh set of decoded Enigma intercepts. The message, titled Operation Moonlight Sonata, outlined a massive raid scheduled for a night of a full moon.
By plotting the intersection of the new Excurret beams, Jones realized with horrifying clarity that the target was Coventry, a city packed with vital aircraft engine factories and thousands of civilians. However, a new crisis emerged. The British jammers were tuned to the wrong frequency for this new system due to a mathematical error in the initial analysis of a captured receiver. Jones was now a man possessed, fighting against time to recalibrate the nation's defenses, while the Luftwaffe prepared to launch a fleet of over 500 bombers toward the Midlands. The tragedy of Coventry became the ultimate test of the Wizard War's moral cost. Churchill was briefed on the impending strike, and a brutal debate erupted within the inner circle. If the British evacuated Coventry in mass or moved every anti-aircraft battery to the city, the Germans would realize their unbreakable Enigma code and their secret Excurret beams were compromised. Jones had to watch as the High Command made the agonizing decision to deploy only limited countermeasures to maintain the illusion of ignorance. On the night of November 14th, the sky over Coventry turned into a hell of fire and steel. Because the British jammers were slightly off frequency, they only managed to smear the beams rather than break them. Many bombs missed the factories, but fell instead onto the medieval city center and the historic cathedral. The unexpected twist came the next morning when Jones visited the smoking ruins. Amidst the rubble, he found that the failure of the jammers had actually provided a vital clue. By mapping where the bombs did fall, he proved that his jamming had indeed shifted the target zone by a few hundred yards, saving the vital factories that would eventually build the engines for the Spitfires. He had saved the war machine, but at the cost of the city's heart, a burden of mathematical sacrifice that would haunt him until his final days.
The smoking ruins of Coventry served as a grim catalyst for a total transformation in British electronic warfare. Reginald Victor Jones realized that crude jamming, simply blasting noise at the enemy, was no longer enough. The Luftwaffe was refining their filters, and the Wizard War was becoming a battle of pure wave mechanics. Jones retreated to his laboratory, his mind focused on a concept that seemed like mathematical magic: destructive interference. He teamed up with Robert Watson Watt, the pioneer of radar, to develop a new generation of directional antennas. These were not mere broadcasting towers, but precision instruments designed to bend the German signals by projecting a mirror image wave that would perfectly overlap and cancel out the Excurret beams. Jones spent sleepless nights calculating parasitic arrays, extra antenna elements placed at specific intervals to focus radio energy into a needle-thin counterbeam. He wasn't just fighting with electricity, he was fighting with geometry, attempting to build a mathematical cage in the sky that would trap the German signals before they could ever reach a British city. The true test of this mathematical weapon came in early 1941, when the Germans deployed the Weigerät, a system so advanced it used only a single beam and a transponder to calculate a bomber's exact position. This was the pinnacle of Nazi engineering, and the German High Command was so confident in its unbreakable logic that they believed the British were still months away from even understanding it. But Jones had already cracked the code. By analyzing reconnaissance photos of new, strangely shaped antenna arrays on the French coast, he deduced the exact frequency and modulation of the Weigerät. He didn't just jam it, he hijacked it. Using his new precision antennas, Jones's team began sending false echoes back to the German ground stations. The unexpected twist occurred during a major raid on London. The German controllers, looking at their monitors, were convinced their bombers were perfectly on course, while in reality, the British counterbeams had tricked the aircraft's computers into banking miles off target. The Luftwaffe pilots watched in confusion as their automated bomb releases triggered over the empty waters of the English Channel, while the German ground controllers reported a perfect hit on the city. Jones had successfully turned the enemy's own genius into a weapon of self-deception, proving that in a war of titans, the man with the sharper pencil could defeat the man with the larger bomb. By mid-1941, the German Jägerett system, codenamed Wotan after the one-eyed god, had become the ultimate challenge for British intelligence. Unlike the previous systems that used intersecting lines, Wotan was a sophisticated two-way conversation between the ground station and the bomber. The ground station sent an interrogation signal, and the aircraft's transponder barked back a reply. The delay between the two allowed the Germans to calculate distance with terrifying accuracy. R.V. Jones realized that simply jamming this conversation was a tactical mistake. If the signal was drowned in noise, the Germans would immediately know their system was compromised and switch to a different frequency. Instead, Jones proposed a move of breathtaking audacity to Prime Minister Winston Churchill. "We don't jam them, sir," Jones explained during a private briefing. "We answer them. We build our own transponders to speak to the German bombers in their own language, and we lie to them." Churchill, puffing on his cigar, grinned at the sheer deviousness of the plan. Operation Lies was born, a mission to hijack the German ranging system and feed false coordinates directly into the enemy's navigation computers. The technical execution of this deception fell to Dr. Robert Cockburn and a specialized team under Jones's direction. They constructed a network of masking beacons across southern England, designed to detect the German interrogation pulses and respond with a forged signal. The timing had to be perfect, down to the microsecond. If the British response arrived too early or too late, the German equipment would reject it as an error. On a clear night, when a high-value naval base was targeted, the first operational test began. As the German bomber approached, the British beacons caught the Wotan signal and spat back a manipulated echo. The unexpected twist was the psychological effect on the German crews. They watched their instruments confirm they were perfectly on target, while in reality, the lying signal had tricked the system into believing the aircraft was 5 miles further ahead than it actually was. The Luftwaffe pilots, trusting their flawless machines, released their payloads into the cold, empty waters of the sea, while the ground controllers in occupied France dutifully recorded a direct hit on the British harbor. Jones had achieved the impossible. He had made the German technology work against itself, turning the most precise guidance system in the world into a liability that led its own pilots into the void. By 1943, the Battle of the Beams had largely been won, but R.V. Jones sensed that the radio-electronic silence from Germany was not a sign of defeat, but a prelude to something far more sinister. While analyzing cryptic signals and intercepted whispers, he began to notice a recurring geographic anomaly, a remote site on the Baltic coast called Peenemünde. Most in British intelligence dismissed it as a mere research station for conventional aircraft, but Jones, ever the physicist, saw a pattern in the shadows. A stray document recovered from a German officer's hotel room in Luxembourg contained sketches of a massive projectile that defied the known limits of artillery. Jones realized that the invisible tracks he'd spent years fighting were no longer just for piloted bombers. He briefed a skeptical Churchill on a terrifying new reality. The Germans were perfecting a vengeance weapon, a rocket that needed no pilot and could not be intercepted by any fighter. To prove his theory, Jones requested a high-altitude reconnaissance flight over the Baltic. When the photographs returned, they revealed a massive pencil-shaped object perched on a launch stand, the V-2 rocket. The discovery of the V-2 was only the tip of the iceberg. The trail from Peenemünde led Jones toward a secret so dark it threatened the very future of civilization. As he cross-referenced the technical personnel at the site, he found a crossover with Germany's elite nuclear physicists. Jones realized that a rocket capable of crossing the English Channel was dangerous, but a rocket carrying an atomic warhead would be the end of the world.
He bypassed the traditional chain of command, presenting his evidence with such surgical precision that the RAF launched Operation Hydra, a massive 600-bomber raid on the Peenemünde facility on the night of August 17, 1943. The unexpected twist came after the war, when declassified documents revealed that the raid hadn't just delayed the rockets. It had decimated the infrastructure the Germans needed for their nuclear research coordination. Jones's crazy obsession with radio beams had led him to pull the thread that unraveled Hitler's entire doomsday program. Without even knowing it at the time, the young physicist had not only silenced the beams, but had arguably prevented the first nuclear strike in history by crippling the nest where the rocket and the atom were supposed to meet.
As the bells of victory rang across London in May 1945, Reginald Victor Jones remained in the shadows, his monumental contributions shielded by the highest levels of classification. While the public celebrated the daring pilots of the RAF and the strategic brilliance of the generals, few knew that the Wizard War had been the true backbone of Britain's survival. Jones, now only 33, had spent 6 years in a state of constant intellectual siege, transforming the humble radio wave into a shield and a deception. He had moved from the skepticism of the cabinet room to the agonizing decisions of the Coventry raid, eventually dismantling the Luftwaffe's technological edge and uncovering the rocket secrets of Peenemünde. The war had changed him from a theoretical physicist into a master of human and electronic intelligence. Yet, as the files were locked away and the Cold War began to brew, Jones found himself at a crossroads. He was the man who knew too much, his methods so effective that the British government chose to keep his Battle of the Beams a state secret for decades, preventing him from receiving the public acclaim that followed other wartime legends. The true legacy of R.V. Jones was not found in medals or parades, but in the silence of the skies over British cities that were never destroyed. After the war, he returned to the world of academia, becoming a professor at the University of Aberdeen, where he taught physics with the same precision he had once used to bend German radio beams. The unexpected twist came in the twilight of his life. When the secrets were finally declassified in the late 1970s, the world realized that Jones hadn't just been an analyst, but a pioneer of modern electronic warfare, whose principles still govern the digital battlefields of today. He had proven that a single individual with a pencil and a deep understanding of wave mechanics could neutralize the industrial might of an empire. When he was finally knighted and acknowledged as one of the great architects of victory, he remained characteristically modest, insisting that he was merely a scientist who had done his duty. He passed away in 1997, leaving behind a world that was safer because one young man had refused to believe that anything was impossible. His story remains a testament to the power of the intellect, a reminder that while fire and steel may start a war, it is the quiet, invisible light of genius that ultimately ends it.